Hello, everybody. This is part 5 of the intro lecture, and we have been cruising through the Walsh American Psychologist article and the therapeutic lifestyle changes. And we ended the last part with talking about nature. So let's move on. Part 4, relationships. We know, and we talked a little bit about this when we talked about that social support pathway. We know that the majority of our sense of happiness is actually best predicted by our sense of connection with others, to love and be loved. And we know that when we look at our quality of life, which we've talked about should be the outcome in healthcare interventions and healthcare research, the most of the variance in our quality of life is dominated by a sense of intimacy. And I'm not necessarily talking about sexual intimacy. I mean, that's important too, but more like a sense of emotional intimacy. So it could be emotional intimacy between parent and child. It could be emotional intimacy in a romantic relationship. It could be emotional intimacy with your friendships. But we know that that is just really critical for our health. So ideally here in therapeutic lifestyle changes, we are all striving to have the healthiest relationships possible. And you all know that if you've ever been in a conflictual relationship, if you've ever been in a romantic relationship where you really needed to go and break up, how stressful that kind of stuff can be. But then also know, on the other end of a breakup, if you knew it was meant to be, there can be this tremendous sense of relief, that type of thing. We know that this is going to be predictive of our happiness. It's going to be predictive of our resilience, and resilience is when we buffer really stressful times and we're able to be resilient and bounce back, as opposed to going through stressful times and really deteriorating. And we know relationships even improve our cognitive capacity, our ability to learn, that type of thing. We know that psychopathology, which is the fancy term for abnormal psychology, when people have psychological disorders, they will result in a lower quality of life and lower sense of connection and intimacy with other individuals, which is why a lot of the modern day therapies, I do this stuff, interpersonal therapy has a relationship component to it. Cognitive behavioral therapies, acceptance and commitment therapies, we all tend to try in our therapies to help individuals when they're struggling with relationships, or relationship conflict, or especially relationship violence. And we really strive in these therapies not only to help make that person healthier, but to help that individual have healthier, better quality relationships. When we start thinking about evolution and our ancestry, we are interdependent creatures. We have evolved to need one another. We are also wired to have empathy, for other people and other people's perspective and other people's feelings. Men have empathy too, and can have empathy. I don't want to, but women, it makes a lot more sense that we women tend to have more empathy for other individuals, which is why it's interesting when people go to find a therapist, and they know the sex of the therapist. A lot of times women want to see a woman therapist, and even men want to see a woman therapist instead of a man therapist, because men are going to assume that the woman would be more empathic towards them, would listen more carefully, would not judge them as much as men would. We'll talk about a lot of that stuff more when we talk about social support. But it would make sense that women are wired for more empathy than men, because in evolution, we've had to take care of newborns, infants, who cannot communicate with their words until they're like 1, 2, 3 years old, and tell you what they need. But they come into this world very dependent on us, like unlike other mammals, they don't stand up and run with the pack. for at least a year old, and then they don't, yeah, toddlers, that kind of thing. So it makes sense that we can hear babies' cries and babies' expressions and watch their nonverbals and figure out what it is that they need. So as an example, I mean, if y'all have been around infants before, there's usually a cry that is, I'm hungry. There's usually a cry where my diaper feels yucky, please change it for me. My oldest son had like a cry that was a bark. It was kind of like a and it took me a while to figure out it was a really unusual cry. He wasn't hungry, didn't have a dirty diaper, he was bored. He wanted interaction. And it took me a while to kind of realize that. So it makes sense that women tend to have more empathy because of that. We're the one that birthed the babies, and oftentimes the caretakers of babies more so than men. We are also wired, unlike other mammals, to have developed very sophisticated speech. And in that very sophisticated speech, it allows us to communicate very clearly with other individuals. And that is very important in our relationships. And it's especially important in psychotherapy that we get in there and we've got the language and we can come down to the level of a person's language and really get in there and try to understand what's going on with them and try to help them. There's also this really interesting effect called the Michelangelo phenomenon, and it has to do with the fact that the longer people are together, the more they start to look like one another. And a lot of that has to do with the longer that people are together, they start to mimic each other's expressions. It's funny, like when we talk for our dog or our cat, we use the same language as we're talking for the animals, that kind of thing. But with the expressions over time, we start to mimic people in our household and how they say things and express things. And then we actually we start to wrinkle as we age in similar ways because we're doing the same kinds of expressions. So like this couple here, look at how much they look like. This is a picture of me and JP years ago. We were out on a trail. And whenever I look at this picture, I scare myself because it's like, oh my gosh, this is my partner. He and I really look alike with certain features. I mean, in ordinary life, we don't look alike, but this picture is like, are we related? That kind of thing. Okay, so it's mainly looking alike because of shared expressions. So the importance of relationships. We know that in psychotherapy, 1/3 of the outcome, so 1/3 of the prediction of if that person we're serving, our client, gets better or doesn't get better, is a function of what we call therapeutic alliance. And therapeutic alliance is the responsibility of the therapist to get in there and have the social skills and have the warmth and have the empathy and have the language to build that relationship and that therapeutic alliance, because for that individual to be able to do their work, to be understood and do their work, is going to require that caring, that relationship. And it's part of the reason why we interview for the students coming into our doctoral program, and some, like our IO, our business program, doesn't do interviews. We do, because not only do we want people to have a strong application, we need to see them. We need to interact with them, and we need to see them, and we need to know, do they have social skills? Do they have empathy? Do they have good nonverbal expression? That kind of thing. Because that stuff, you all, is not trainable. You've got to have those basic social skills in order to become an effective therapist and train in all the more advanced skills that we have to train our students in. A lot of other healthcare programs do the same thing. It's part of the reason why they do interviews, just making sure that people have those requisite skills. And so it's the responsibility of the therapist to build that. And then I would say it's a responsibility for any healthcare provider to get in there and to be able to do that. Those relationships are critical. And then ideally what goes down in the therapeutic relationship and psychotherapy starts to generalize for the client to other relationships. So as an example, if a client is having difficulty getting in touch with their emotions and expressing their emotions, the therapist helps them do that. And then that's going to be critical for that client out in the real world, recognizing emotions, expressing emotions to loved ones, listening to their emotional experiences and their perspectives. That's going to improve their own relationships out in the real world. There's also this thing, and there was a book that was published. I've not read this book. I've read about the book and I can certainly resonate with it, but it's called Bowling Alone. And it's a book about the state of our culture for you young people. Okay. And the bowling alone effect would be, so like when I was a little girl, my parents were a part of a bowling team. And we would go once a week and they would go bowl and drink beer and laugh with their friends, and just enjoy it. And then, me and my little kid friends, we would bowl too. People don't do that nearly as much anymore. Okay. So there's just not those social connections where people go and do stuff like that. And that's missing in modern day culture. And so the idea of bowling alone is you go to the bowling alley and you bowl alone. And that's kind of just a sad thing to think about, right? But we're seeing more and more social isolation. Again, we've got a whole lecture on social support coming up later this semester. But people are spending less real time with family and friends. They have less intimate friends and less infinite confidants. It's part of why I wanted y'all to have your study buddies. So you've got people in the class, and just less involvement in civic groups and communities. And so much of that is a function of people spending time on social media, especially young people on social media. I know whenever I go out to a restaurant and I see families and everybody's on their phone, it's just like, ugh. Ideally, family meals together are a time where you can discuss your day. We had a bit of a tradition of highs and lows when I was raising my sons, of like, let's hear about your highs and lows for the day. You get a perspective, get them talking, that kind of thing, and not allowing phones at the dinner table as an example. And that gets challenging. That's challenging for a lot of young people where their social life unfolds on a screen instead of in person. And you all know that it's so much easier to read a person and express to a person when you're doing that in person, and as opposed to, say, text messaging, for example. Okay. All right. TLC number 5, recreation and enjoyable activities. This one's going to overlap a little bit with nature, but I love the breakdown of this word, that recreation means recreation. And we are able to heal ourselves and feel better, even feel more, thinking more clearly, and feel more creative, as an example, when we have engaged in recreation. We know that most psychopathologies, and when people have psychological disorders, a lot of times it's because they're not getting enough reinforcement in their lives. There's quite the theory that poor reinforcement creates depression, as an example. And we know that recreation can increase our sense of reinforcement. A lot of times this overlaps with nature. This is, if you all have not been to Valley Cruces Park, if you've hung out in Boone and not like gone anywhere, this is a beautiful park. We are so fortunate to be a mile from this. We call it Leo's Park. He's my dog. So of course it's his park because he loves going to the park. He starts, when we turn on the road, the road is a dirt road right beside the Mass General store. As soon as we turn from the paved road to the gravel road, he starts singing. He's like, he's all excited to be able to go out and hang out at the park and sniff and do what he does. This fog here is the Watauga River. And so this park is over here. It's absolutely beautiful. And this is a morning where the fog is lifting off of the river. You can go, and there are bike paths where, not like adult bikes, is more like kid bikes, but you can run, you can walk. It's right on the river, so people go and they fly fish during the summertime. There's kids everywhere, wading in the river and playing, and then they've got swing sets and all that kind of stuff. Beautiful. Um, we know that there's a body of literature to suggest that humor is very valuable as a sense of recreation for people's moods. I know there are times where my whole family kind of knew this when I was growing up. If I had a really rough day, I would go and get on Netflix by myself. Sometimes it involved a glass of wine, and I would watch stand-up comedy. My family, we had a family tradition of growing up watching stand-up, and that's been a ritual that I've carried on with my sons. We get together now that they're adults, and a lot of times we watch stand-up together and just laugh and just have a good time. But people who have more humor in their lives are going to be happier and healthier. We know, kind of back to that recreation, people who are engaged in arts, music, so it could be visual arts, it could be crafting, those kind of things. People that experience those things and appreciate those things, as well as artists who do those things and create those things, those individuals tend to be happier and healthier. And that's why we have the therapeutic arts. Some of you in the class are probably music therapy majors, as an example. Art therapy, I've done a little bit of continuing ed in understanding what is art therapy for, particularly for eating disorders, which is one of the areas that I treat. So therapeutic arts, yeah, getting out there and just having some fun and not always being working, or embedded in like deep, depressing kind of thoughts, that kind of thing can be really healthy for people. Therapeutic lifestyle change number 6, relaxation and stress management. We've got a whole lecture on stress and coping, actually 2 lectures on stress and coping coming up. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here. But for the most part, most of us are not raised in understanding stress and how it affects us, or in how to manage stress. A lot of us don't have families that taught us how to manage stress. We don't tend to, it's one of those things like, in high school, when you learn how to do your taxes or manage your money in high school. A lot of us, in school and high school did not learn how to manage our stress more effectively. And it's one of those things where we do this so frequently in psychotherapy. How do you know what you don't know? How do you know what you haven't learned? Well, most people don't know how to do these things. And so that's a regular part of what we do in training our clients, our patients in behavioral medicine, in psychotherapy, is how to better manage their stress. Most of our modern day stresses are novel, being really anxious about an exam coming up, where your grade and your passing, staying in college depends on your grade on that exam. That's brand new. Our ancestors, who were hunter gatherers, did not have to deal with that. We talked a little bit about social media. Getting ghosted by somebody you're dating is a modern kind of problem. Okay. In the old days, the person you were dating was in your community, and you couldn't just ghost them and not be around them. You usually had to, even during a breakup, at some point, talk to them about what went wrong and why and all that kind of stuff. So modern day stressors, I feel for your generation. You just have to deal with stuff that I didn't have to in my generation. And we definitely weren't dealing with as we evolved in natural selection over time. A lot of times people, their responses to stress are not skilled in positive management. And then a lot of times they're just downright self-destructive. So things like abusing Adderall to be able to study more effectively, abusing alcohol or other drugs to be able to relax or to go to sleep, snapping at the people around you who could be your source of social support, and pushing them away because you're all snippy and grumpy. And so Walsh breaks down the relaxation training into a couple categories. He's got one that he calls more somatic, which would be more physical and psychological. Here he talks about using self-hypnosis, using guided imagery, where you take your mind to a beautiful, pleasant place, progressive muscle relaxation, stuff like that. We're going to talk more about this in the stress management lecture. This has been effective in decreasing stress and anxiety disorders. His other kind of Relaxation he calls contemplative. This would be a little bit more like meditations or yogas. This has been found to be effective in decreasing insomnia, giving people better quality sleep. It's been effective in treating anxiety disorders. It's been effective in treating eating disorders, in treating depression, borderline personality disorders, which is people where their moods are up and down really rapidly kind of thing. Learning how to soothe themselves. These types of relaxation techniques, stress management techniques, they are a cornerstone of dialectical behavioral therapy, which is our most effective therapies for treating personality disorders like borderline personality. These are key in acceptance and commitment therapy, in developing self-awareness and the ability to soothe oneself and reduce one's stress. It's been shown this mindfulness meditation treatment has been shown to decrease anxiety and depression. You're going to see a documentary later in the semester when we talk about treating chronic pain. Jon Kabat-Zinn is one of the big names in this field in doing mindfulness meditation. You're going to see him in action. We know when we give this treatment to caregivers, so you all saw the stuff in the new medicine, the caregivers for the Alzheimer's patients, how stressful that can be for individuals. We know, and this would even apply to like healthcare providers too. When you do this treatment, it increases their empathy for other individuals. So whoever they're caretaking for, again, healthcare providers for their patients, their clients, it increases their sensitivity, their emotional stability, and it decreases burnout. So, I mean, this can be really powerful stuff for yourself, for your own stress. It can be very powerful stuff giving this to the clients and the patients that we serve, and it can make us better healthcare providers. So good stuff here. TLC number 7, religious and spiritual involvement. We know in the scientific literature on religion, the key thing that makes our religious values and our religious history and our religious practice positive is if we believe in a loving God that gives grace for our sins. It is very different if we have been raised a little more fundamentalist with this idea that we're always sinning and that God is a punishing God, and the idea that if we are good, we go to heaven, and if we are bad, we're going to go to hell and rot in hell or burn in hell. That positive religion and that loving God does our mental and physical health a tremendous amount of good. The individuals that are practicing more the punishing God, that is actually can be very precarious for one's health, particularly if an individual fears that they've done wrong and they're being punished, and that they are going to go to hell. Now, it's even especially harmful because we cannot control our thoughts. There are things that we can do therapeutically in CBT and ACT to change our thoughts or diffuse from our thoughts, but we cannot control our thoughts. And if you've been raised to believe that your thoughts are sinful and you're supposed to control your sinful thoughts and you cannot, that is a formula, especially if you got OCD, that is a formula for psychological hell for people. And I've worked with individuals who are raised to believe that even our thoughts could be sinful. Okay, so we know that individuals who are weekly service attenders, and here we're talking about organized religion, have on average 7 years added to their lifespan. So this is how powerful this can be. And it's the one place psychologically that having a sense of an external locus of control, the idea that God, Allah, is looking out for me, is caring for me, has some sense of control and destiny in my life, that's really healthy for people. Having an external locus of control anywhere else psychologically is actually harmful for people. So let me give you an example. If you have an internal locus of control, and you got a grade that disappointed you on an exam, an internal locus of control may send you to go talk to your professor about that exam, or an internal locus of control might tell you, hey, I didn't study enough. I didn't study enough for that exam. I need to study more for the next exam. And that internal locus of control is going to serve you well. However, if you've got an external locus of control in your academic life, and let's say you get a grade on your exam that's lower than you expected and disappointed you, and you're like, that professor screwed me over and gave me a bad grade, then you're putting all the blame on somebody else. It's external to yourself, and it's likely not going to correct your sense of your responsibility and improve your performance in the class, because it's somebody else's fault and not your responsibility. So usually external locus of control is unhealthy for people, is what I'm getting at. Okay. But in this situation, when it's a sense of external locus of control, that there's God that loves me and cares about me, and I can pray to God and ask for comfort or help, and I know that other people are praying for me, those kinds of things, that's really, really valuable. And a lot of times in psychology, we don't address this very important facet of individuals' lives. And it's no wonder a lot of people think that all psychologists are atheists and are judgmental about religion. And that's absolutely not the case. And particularly in our doctoral program, which is really focused on rural services, that's very important in our surrounding communities. Christianity, I mean, we certainly have individuals in the high country that are Jewish individuals, some Muslim individuals, but most of our communities are Christian, and we have to kind of get in there and ask about that. Were they raised in a more fundamentalist conservative church that believes in a punishing God? Were they raised in a church that's a little more flexible, more liberal, that type of thing, that accepts everybody regardless of how they identify, and that God gives grace for sins and those types of things. We got to get in there and figure that stuff out, because that's going to be really important. It's no wonder that a lot of modern therapies, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, those are 12-step programs that the ultimate goal, they are religious programs. The ultimate goal is that you can heal your addiction by getting closer to other people, by becoming closer to God, and acknowledging that you have a disease. So those are spiritual programs. Dialectical behavioral therapy has a spiritual component to it, and acceptance and commitment therapy. We usually start ACT, where we start with doing values exercises with them. I've got these beautiful card sorts that I use with my clients. I've used it. A bunch of my family members have done the values exercise, where you go through all these different cards, and in the end, you land on somewhere like 4 to 6 key values that are driving forces in your life. Just to share with you some of my values when I've done my card sort. Purpose and meaning in life, that's really important to me. One of my values is connection with others, to love and be loved. One of my values has to do with health, as an example, no surprise here. But yeah, we do that. And then a lot of these therapies really focus on a sense of mindfulness and peace, that for a lot of people find that in prayer. A lot of people find that in daily meditation or doing yoga, some other types of practices. And then a sense of community. What a lot of churches do, and I love from birth to death and funerals, this sense of like, we're all in this place together, believing similar things, humbling ourselves to higher power. A lot of churches and synagogues and communities serve as social work, making sure that shut-ins and people are getting visited, and they're taking food to people when they need food. A sense of community and celebrating a baptism, a sense of community and not celebrating, but attending to funerals and saying goodbye to individuals and supporting those who are left behind when there's been death of a loved one. Social work in terms of, things like collecting money when people can't afford their heat during the winter. So beautiful things are happening in a lot of these situations, but psychologically, it really boils down to kind of, is it this or is it this? I know I've worked with quite a few clients who were raised in a particular type of church and it doesn't fit with them, particularly if it's a client that realizes that they are gay or trans or just don't fit with those punishing God values, who've had to find a new church and a new community where they feel like they are loved and accepted and fits better with their values, and fits better with what they need for their physical health and their psychological health. So number 7, religious. Number 8, contribution and service. Okay. And here we're talking about altruism. And we know that people that have more altruism, who are giving to others, caring for others, it could be human beings, it could be volunteering at the Humane Society and volunteering and helping the puppies and the kitties and the dogs and the cats and that kind of thing. People who engage in altruistic behavior are less greedy. They tend to have less jealousy. They tend to have less egocentricity, which is kind of that narcissism, that over focus on self and one's self-worth. I talked about a little bit earlier, a lot of times going out in nature for me, or laying on the ground looking up at the stars at night makes me feel small. And I actually think that's a good thing. We're just little, it's like going up in an airplane, looking down, and like we're just little specks, we're just little ants in the world. And that can scare the crap out of you, having those kinds of existential thoughts, or it can humble you and just make you realize, like, yeah, you're not the center of the universe. There's a lot else going on around you. The idea that a lot of us are wounded healers. And a lot of times we see this in medicine, we see this in psychology. A lot of us have had our own suffering, our own journeys, and we are on this path where we want to train and give back and help other people. We've got to be careful with that because, and we see this in our doctoral program when we're training students, that just because you've maybe healed or learned to manage from something doesn't mean that what you went through is how you treat everybody else, because there's all kinds of different ways that we can deliver therapies that can help individuals. So we got to be careful with that part. But yeah, a lot of times people, it's like, yeah, either I got the care I needed or I didn't get the care I needed. And I feel for people out there who in underserved communities need that. But individuals who want to give back. We know that people who volunteer live healthier and longer lives. You all know, you probably know, I had a client asked me this recently, who's a character. I just love her. And we get on Zoom because she's not around here anymore. We get on Zoom and I was like, hey, how are you doing? And she says, how are you doing? And I was like, fine, she said, because you don't get into much of yourself. She's like, I recently heard that psychologists have high suicide rates, and I just want to know how you're really doing. And I just laughed with her. It's like, yes, you're right. A lot of healthcare professionals do. And we got to be careful with that kind of stuff. And I just said, trust me, I'm not suicidal. I'm here for you. How are you doing? And just put it back on her. But it was cute that she asked me that. So you hear about burnout, and it's really important that we figure out as healthcare providers how we engage in our own self-care and how we try to reap and remind ourselves that even if we've had a really tough day, let's say we've been working with somebody who's been suicidal and we had to do risk assessment, we had to do counseling against access to lethal means and that kind of thing, how to go home and not feel drained, and how to be able to go home and feel like I did really good work today and I may have saved a life, or I may have really helped somebody because I made the correct diagnosis and I've given them hope and we're going to start on the treatment. It's really important as healthcare providers that we figure out how to do that. But then also knowing it doesn't have to be our profession. It doesn't have to be what we get paid and make our livelihood. It could also be giving back and volunteering. We just talked about religion. That's really valuable for a lot of people in their synagogue, in their church, or whatever that might be, their temple, to be able to go and help others and serve other people. We know that a lot of the modern day therapies, we get clients involved. I had a teenage client who I was helping treat for an eating disorder, anxiety, some other stuff, who was a really good student in school and was dreading the summer because in the summer, she was going to be at home, mainly alone, doing nothing, not knowing what to do with herself. She was not old enough to drive, was not old enough to work and have a paid job, and was dreading the summer. And I realized how much this person loved her pets and loved animals. And we worked it out that they were able to have parents take her to the Humane Society twice a week, and she volunteered and helped with the animals and the kitties and all that kind of stuff, and absolutely had a much better summer because there was this sense of purpose and meaning and giving back and helping out with the animals. We got to be careful about caretaker burnout, though. Just like we saw in the new medicine, the caretakers of the Alzheimer's patients, how rough that could be on their minds and their bodies and their wound healing. This was a picture of a healthcare professional during the height of COVID pandemic. And it touches me when I look at this, like, oh my gosh, I was so thankful I was not on the front lines. And you heard about, there was just a leader of a hospital, a female medical doctor in New York, as an example, who died of suicide. And we saw healthcare providers were dying of suicide at a much higher rate than typical during the pandemic because they were exhausted and they were terrified and they were torn from their families. And yeah, that's a formula. That is an absolute formula for burnout at work, and then psychological burnout for the individuals. So, yeah. All right. Next in line, I want you to read the Sinatra et al. Article called Electric Nutrition. And I want you to watch the Earthing movie, because we're moving beyond the Walsh article. Walsh had his 8 TLCs, and I'm adding 2 more. So I've got 10 in this class. I'm adding the Earthing. And what we're seeing here, so definitely watch the movie and let's read this article. Earthing or grounding. We know nowadays that a lot of the conditions that people suffer from is really an inflammation that's going on internal in their bodies that we oftentimes cannot see. It is normal to have, you think about getting an injury, it's normal to have a short-term inflammation response where you get swelling because you got all the immune system coming to an injury. You can even feel an injury if it's inflamed. Like veterinarians will feel an animal, and if it feels warm to the touch, they know that part of the body's been injured or has disease because it's inflamed. So inflammation is meant to be a short-term response where it creates immune system response and it helps you heal, and then the inflammation is supposed to retract and go away. We are not meant to be in a state of constant inflammation. But we know that so many modern day illnesses we know are a chronic state of inflammation, cardiovascular disease, inflammation going on in our cardiovascular system. We know diabetes, both type 1 and type 2, are attributed to chronic inflammation. We've seen a rise in autoimmune conditions, particularly among women, but autoimmune conditions like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis that we know implicate chronic inflammation. A lot of cancers are attributable to inflammation, and even Alzheimer's disease. And there are a lot of neuroscientists that are saying every psychological disorder is some kind of inflammatory thing gone awry in the brain. Anyways, so back in the 1950s, people walked around with shoes that either walked around barefoot or they walked around, think about like moccasins that Native Americans would have worn, as an example. They had leather soles that were conductive to the electricity between us and the earth. Look down here. We see in this graph that what happened in the 1950s on, people started putting carpets down on their flooring in their homes. People had raised beds, they weren't sleeping on the earth. And then we see this big boost in Nike and Adidas and Converse. I had my Converse shoes when I played basketball. We saw this big burst in purchasing and wearing shoes that had rubber soles. And when we're walking around with shoes and rubber soles, we're never touching the earth. And we are not able to share electrons between us and the earth because remember, rubber is a resistor. And yeah, so we're not able, so most of us now are wearing non-conductive soles. We're not sleeping on the ground, we're sleeping in raised beds. We don't go around walking barefoot, we don't go roll around in the grass. Most of us, if you've had the experience where you go to the beach, most of us, we love this experience. You get in the beach, it's like, oh, feet in sand, or body on towel laying in the sand. What a beautiful feeling that can be. And we know that oxygen is absolutely necessary for life, but we only want a certain amount of oxygen in our cells. And when we have this thing called oxidative stress, our cells can become toxic and cannot function as they're supposed to, and our body's not healing. And this is a sign that we've got these free radicals, and the free radicals in our body are seeking electrons in order to do what our cells do and in order to heal. And so if you think about it, what's going on here is most of us are in an electron deficiency because we are not connected to the earth directly, and we are not grounded. Again, I want you to read that article. I want you to watch the Earthing movie. I got a little bit more about that. Gerald Pollack, some of his research talking about the fact that we are 70% water. Water does conduct electricity. That's why you don't want your hairdryer falling when it's on, falling into your bathtub. And that's why all bathrooms have those electrical outlets where if anything were to touch water, it will blow and blow the circuit so that you can't, say, electrocute yourself by your electric toothbrush or your hairdryer falls in the bathtub and kills you, as an example. It's why we're not supposed to be in the swimming pool or the lake when it's lightning, because if that lightning hits the water, it's going to come through your water in your body and it's going to electrocute you. So we're about 70% water. We are clearly biochemical electrical beings. Every single nerve impulse and the functioning of our brain, every nerve impulse in our body is a chemical electrical process where you've got neurotransmitter substances jumping from over the synapse from nerve to nerve. So we are electrical beings. We don't think of ourselves very much that way, but we are. Okay. He talks about the fact that we want in our body's water, we want it to be negatively charged because this increases our cells' use of ATP, which is how our cells get energy to do whatever it is they do. Muscle cells contract and move, brain cells conduct electricity so we can have thoughts. Islets of Langerhans cells in the pancreas secrete insulin. So whatever it is the cell is supposed to be doing in their organs, increasing ATP makes the cell have the energy to do what it needs to do. It's important for protein production, which is going to be critical for cell replication, for healing, muscle strength, all that stuff. Heart strength, heart's the most important muscle in the body. So this being grounded, touching the earth, gives us the cell energy that we need for wound healing. And when we are grounded and we are touching the earth, we are able to gain the earth's electrons, which are negatively charged, into the body immediately. If you struggle with intense anxiety or you struggle with panic attacks, when you feel a panic attack going on, go connect to the earth. Okay. Barefoot, not in the freezing cold, because I don't want you to have hypothermia, but go connect to the earth. Some individuals, as an example, can really heal themselves from a panic attack by getting on their knees and their hands and touching the ground. Because very quickly you're going to be absorbing electrons coming from the earth into your electrical body. And it's those electrons are going to go everywhere very quickly. You know, electricity travels quickly in our body. Rubber is a electrical resistor, which is why we put rubber around all electrical wires. My father was an electrician. I grew up with wires and wire cutters and all this stuff around our home all the time. But yeah, so the electricity is going to go through the metal part of the wires, but it's not going to go outside of the wires because it is encased in synthetic rubber. Now, shoes, if this dude were barefoot and if that was the earth and that looks more like a gym floor, if this dude was touching the earth, he would be getting electrons going immediately into his body and the water in his body. But by wearing rubber soles, there is no connection there. So most of us are living our lives ungrounded, okay? We are not going and touching the earth. We are not sleeping on the earth. We're sleeping on beds, etc. And that takes its toll. Watch the Earthing movie. Take notes on the Earthing movie. Take notes on all your documentaries. And then read the article. The science is strong, you all. So I call this the 9th TLC. Part of what I think is going wrong with individuals and all the psychological suffering and the medical illness created by inflammation is because we are not grounded, and it is taking its toll on our mind body health. Okay. The clinical results, the science is, you know, I watched the movie and I was like, okay, this seems kind of woo woo and hippity dippity and like go hug a tree and you'll feel better kind of thing. But then I started thinking about it in terms of evolution, and I started going into the scientific articles. My magic words when I go into Google Scholar, not Google, you don't want to search Google, you want to search Google Scholar, is review and whatever else. You can go do this. Go into Google Scholar, type in review or meta-analysis and grounding and health, or earthing and health, and you will find some really cool stuff. The research suggests it very quickly reduces inflammation, and then therefore, if it's reducing inflammation where people are experiencing pain, it reduces pain. You can look at some of the imaging where people are deliberately pre and then grounding and then doing imaging, and you see a very rapid reduction in inflammation and pain. There's some fantastic research to show it increases blood flow because it reduces blood viscosity. Here you've got a picture of blood in an ungrounded person, and then taking a look at the blood flow and the fact that you don't have everything clumping, and you get more volume in blood flow, and then less viscosity, which is a good thing. So basically less clotting, that kind of thing, going on immediately after they've been grounded. Some very powerful data on wound healing. Here you've got this individual with this diabetic wound who hasn't been earthing, and then what goes on after earthing. The number one thing that people report when they start grounding, and this is one of the things that I experienced when I started doing it, was much better quality sleep. Feeling like I go to bed and go deep into sleep, and I wake up so much more refreshed. I get up less often and have to go use the restroom. And this is one of the first things you will hear people start to report. You will see Clint Ober in the movie talk about how he had chronic pain, and when he made his little thing on his bed with his wire tape and then grounded it to the earth, how he wasn't having pain at night, and that improved his quality of sleep. People report more daytime energy when they've been grounded. Women report less distressing hormonal fluctuations, less PMS, less painful menstrual symptoms. And then a lot of people are doing the earthing stuff for cosmetic effects. And here you've just got, this is what's going on in facial thermal pre-grounding and then what's going on post-grounding, just showing that this individual is getting better blood flow to their skin all throughout their body and their face. And just a lot of people experience cosmetic benefits from that. So yeah, so even in the cosmetic industry. So really good stuff. Decreases stress. This is an example of an individual who has a grounding mat that they have purchased. You can buy these things on Amazon. They're about $30. And what you do is you see it's got a little plug into the mat right here. And then the other end of the plug, you could either put it out in the ground. But what a lot of people do is, you know, how your electrical outlet looks like a face. And normally when you plug something in, it either plugs in, you know, to the two eyes, or if you've got like an appliance, it'll plug into the whole thing. The bottom part, the little mouth part of the outlet, is the ground. And it's actually every little electrical outlet you've got, that part goes and electrically into the ground. Yeah, so anyway, so the other end of this little dude right here plugs into the mouth part, but not the eyes part of the outlet. So it sends it to the ground. Then what's happening here is any electrically charged negative electrons from the earth are traveling from the ground in your electrical system up into the pad. Some people use the pad and like to do the barefoot thing. Some people use the pad and they buy it and they use it, you know, wherever they're seated when they're working during the day, they sit on it. And then a lot of people put it in their bed. Best way to do this, you can buy sheets, you can buy a pad. Some people put it under the fitted sheet down by their feet, so that their feet, as they're rolling around at night, are touching it and they're grounded at night. You can buy pillows. Some people like to put the pad more up where their upper body is, and so they're sleeping on it again under the fitted sheet at night. It's a great way, like in the wintertime here, where it would not be advised to go out in the frozen earth and put your feet in and then freeze your feet. So decreasing stress, we know it decreases and normalizes cortisol levels. So this is important in treating sleep disorders. It's important in treating hypertension, high blood pressure. It's important in decreasing the negative effects of cortisol on the cardiovascular system. It is important in actually creating more bone health. So this actually say increasing bone density, not decreasing, but improving bone health. It's great. Reducing cortisol is going to improve mood. So it's great in treating anxiety disorders and depression. It's great in treating autoimmune diseases where the inflammatory response is attacking your own body. And it's going to improve glucose levels, usually lowering glucose levels, but I'm saying here improving it, which is good for people who have prediabetes or people who have diabetes. Lots of great scientific benefits. So normalizing cortisol, calming the electrical activity in the brain. There's some really interesting research. So you got a doggy over here. A lot of veterinarians are recommending grounding for animals that have inflammatory issues, but there's some fascinating research with animals where, and you know how animals like outside, they like to lay on the ground. Cats do, rabbits do, dogs do, that kind of stuff. But a lot of times we like to give them beds with foam that have rubber because we think that's more comfortable. But when you give the animals, this is fascinating stuff. When you give animals the choice of going and laying down on a mat that is grounded, plugged into the outlet or the ground, or a similar mat that's not plugged in, the animals will migrate to the grounded mat. They're seeking the earth. Somewhere in that, we human beings lost that instinct of wanting to go and be a part of the earth. This is effective in reducing muscle tension and headaches for people who get tension headaches. It activates the parasympathetic autonomic nervous system. We're going to talk more in the stress lecture about that. That is the rest and digest and relax part of the nervous system. We want that on. We need that on to sleep. We need that on to digest our food. We need that on for sexual response. It's very important in our healing, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to improve heart rate variability, which we want. We want the heart rate to be flexible and we want variability. It lowers blood pressure. It's even been shown, we talked about the animals, it's shown to be safe for pets. So if you've got a pet who has arthritis or other health problems, you might want to consider this. It's been shown to be therapeutic even for premature babies. Grounded premature babies are going to heal and be healthier than ungrounded premature babies. There's some interesting research on massage therapists. So part of what it feels so good at getting massage is the massage, but some of what's going on is the massage therapist is sharing electrons in touch. It's part of the reason why cuddling and other kind of touch when somebody's grounded. It's part of the reason why we want to go hug our dog who's been outside, because when we're hugging our dog, we're getting electrons from them because they've been out there with their paws and they're grounded. There's a lot going on here, y'all. But even premature babies. So, but the massage therapist, there's some research showing if they are giving all day long, they get drained of their electrons. And if they're not grounding themselves, they're going to experience all kinds of inflammatory side effects just from touching other people and sharing electrons with other people. Research showing it reduces asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. That makes sense. There's inflammatory conditions in the bronchial and the lungs. Has even been shown to protect people from the cytokine storm that kills them, some people, when they get COVID. So lots of really, really cool positive effects. And it's just getting back to our evolutionary roots and getting grounded. So the Earth's nutrition, the electrons are a charge. There's also this thing called the Schumann resonance, which is more of a Earth heartbeat. And so it's not just gaining the electrons, but when we are grounded, we are feeling the rhythms of the Earth. There's some really interesting stuff to show that the best way, I'm going to try this because I'm going to be doing some traveling this next year, and I haven't tried this yet. That when we travel, part of jet lag is we're losing the rhythm of the time zone, and that if you go to your destination and you get grounded in your destination, so it could be bare feet on the ground if possible, earthing mat, whatever it might be, that it really helps with jet lag because it tells your circadian rhythm, okay, I'm on Great Britain time now as opposed to Eastern Standard Time in the United States. There are gravitational forces going on with the Earth. The Earth has its own magnetism and electromagnetism. So some of the explanation of the Earth's nutrition is the electrons, but there's a lot of other things going on there too. And then the final TLC, I've added this because Walsh didn't cover it, is there's some really interesting research on exposure to sunlight, and in particular, red and infrared light. Okay. And you all know that experience where we get these long winter days, we're cooped up inside in Boone. And when we get, spring hits, man, and the sun comes out and it's a warmer day and everybody's out on the quad. I love that effect, outside of IG Grow, everybody's on the quad. And you know that feeling, right? Where you go out and you're like, hi, I am worshiping the sun. This feels so good, that kind of thing. Or feet in sand at the beach, where you all know what that feeling is like. And we know in the spectrum of light, in the visible spectrum, we can see everything down to blue lights. That's the bad stuff coming off our screens. But we find that the red light and the infrared light, the infrared feels warm, the red light doesn't feel heat. This is what we're thirsty for. And part of the reason why nature feels so good is the plants are reflecting the infrared light. So when we go out and we see greenery and it feels so good to us, what we see, it's because we are getting the infrared light reflecting off the green plants. And that is what we're really thirsty for. It's why being in nature feels so good. It's why being in sunshine feels so good. And actually, when it comes down to the dangerous part of UV light coming from the sun, and you hear all this stuff about UV light is giving people skin cancer or melanoma. There's actually some controversy about that. being exposed to natural sunlight. My room here, this blocks me from UV sunlight, so I'm not like just frying every day being and working in this room. It actually blocks that. The being exposed to natural sunlight on normal doses on a regular basis is actually really healthy for us. It is important in making vitamin D. It is not as dangerous for our skin and skin cancer. Where people get themselves into trouble is when they are not in sunlight, not in sunlight, not in sunlight, and they go to the tropics and they spend a week laying out in the sun, getting sunburn and frying their skin. That's where the danger to skin wrinkling and the danger to skin cancer occurs. So these blast dose as opposed to regular doses. So when you hear about, like every time you got to be outside, you need the sunblock and all that kind of stuff. There's some controversy about that. I just want you to know that normal doses can be really healthy. Some of what we've been seeing in some of the vitamin D deficiency is because everybody's using excessive amounts of sunblock, sun lotion, even in mild exposure kind of things. Okay. And think about it. Our ancestors evolved outdoors. There's a whole body of literature, and I've got some of these articles posted up on As You Learn for you. Red light therapy or photobiomodulation, where you got the light creating modulation and changes in the biology. We know that these red light therapies, and you can buy these panels. This is an example of a person standing in front of a panel. Is effective in treating depression and anxiety disorders, is effective in treating depression in this research and enhancing our cognitive functioning. It is effective in treating certain kinds of pains, the neuropathies and the complex pains. There's some research showing that actually green light therapy on the spectrum can be better for migraine and fibromyalgia. And sunlight exposure and the health benefits, we've seen this in animal studies, we've seen this in human studies. And there's been some shift from even looking at in some of the research, is sunlight exposure all about the making vitamin D? And we do need sunlight exposure through our skin to be able to make vitamin D. That is true. But there's been a little bit of a shift. Is it all about this consequence? Or are there other functions of light in the spectrum of light? And the research, this stuff up here is shown, yeah, there are other functions of light on the human body, which again might be why we, again, spring day after being cooped up, we go and we're thirsty for it. We're like, oh, we want it. There's research on bright light therapy, which is kind of like full light spectrum. We don't get this from an ordinary light bulb. I have my clients on a regular basis when they have both seasonal affective disorder, seasonal depression, SAD, and when they have non-seasonal depression, I will regularly ask them to purchase a full spectrum bright light and expose themselves to it in the morning. You do not want to expose yourself to it at night. It will impair your sleep. But we are wired to wake up with the sun and feel energy with the sun. And we are wired after the sun goes down, minus the night owls. When the sun goes down, we're wired with that lower level of light to want to wind down and go to sleep at night in the dark. Lots going on here, you all. We are underutilizing this as a therapy. All righty, that is the end to all of the parts, the intro parts of the health psychology lecture. I will see you all soon, and we will be switching over to the next series of the behavior change lectures. Bye.